Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Bayer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. I'm Mike Bayer, and I'm here with my new friend, but we have a lot of common friends, Rob, who he and his wife live and work in Southeast Asia, but they really have a global impact to what they do. They have a B4T incubator. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to tell some of the story because I'll get it wrong. And the less I say, the better. So, Rob, welcome to the podcast.
It's great to be here. Great to meet you finally, Mike. It's heard your name floating around for some time. So it's great to almost see you face to face.
This is the next best thing, right?
Yeah.
The new world of virtual reality. So Rob, just really tell us the story. I mean, I love what you're doing. I'm not going to try to explain it. I'll let you explain it. But How did you get this from where you grew up to where you are now and doing what you're doing with? Because this is a great, we were chatting earlier, just getting to know each other. It's just a great story of seeing opportunity and stepping up to meet needs, very real needs in the world of BAM. And that's why I'm intrigued. Now I know exactly why Carrie Ann wanted us to get connected. So
it starts very young. And for me, that line is quite a clear one. I grew up overseas, so I'm what they call a third culture kid. And my father was a church planter and seminary teacher, kind of your traditional cross-cultural worker. And even by the time I was an early teen, had a sense that there was purpose for my life. And that purpose didn't know how that would look, was pretty sure it wouldn't look like what I saw my father doing. And in part, it was because I saw a lot of his frustrations. Being in a relatively open country, but still one that was very resistant. And I would see my parents do all sorts of things to draw relationship, to invite relationship, to draw contact. And so although he would be the last person to call himself entrepreneurial, their church plants inevitably looked like shop fronts that offered different services to the community they were trying to reach, that on the weekends would rearrange the furniture to facilitate gatherings on spiritual discussions. For me, that's what I grew up with. That's what church looked like. And everything that happened, from English classes to cooking classes to kids classes to drop-in center for after-school homework help, all of that was literally in the marketplace, as in right on shopping streets. So that had a great impact. You fast forward, then it was almost an inevitability that would be the kind of expression that was the natural fit for me. And so in the early 2000s, my wife, 2 kids, and I, and one child on their way, ended up in China, and we, in many ways, continued the career I had started on the west coast of Canada, which was running language schools.
Okay.
And being who we were in that context, and having a lot, I would say we practiced a lot. You know, we were in a very post-Christian Vancouver city, very post-Christian context. Yeah. The correlations were and remain very striking. You live with authenticity. You live your faith in a way that is authentic and invitational. And that really prepared us for other sensitive contexts that we ended up working in over the years. So as we worked our way through that part of the world, we were in 4 different cities, starting different, at times taking over and expanding businesses that were going. More and more people would be coming and asking, okay, well, how do you do this? How do you maintain your license? How do you, some of the questions, like, some of that, but also some of those, okay, how do I look more business-like?
The very practical logistics of the thing.
And those questions that I'm sure your podcast deals with, it's not about putting on a mask. It's about being it. And if you're not it, maybe you should look for another approach. And if you are it, why aren't you engaged in what matters to God the most?
So I'm curious, Rob, as you're sharing this, it sounds like in the beginning the business was a means to an end. It was a strategy. But somewhere through all this, you've obviously developed a more integrated view of business for transformation, and you've really obviously have a business background and a business mind. But somewhere in this, it came together in a new way. Tell us a little bit about that, and just everybody, all of my listeners, they're around the edges of BAM or they're deeply in BAM, but we all got their different ways.
I think that's an astute observation. I think for my generation, I felt like I stood out. I felt like a sore thumb. I neither felt compelled to go to seminary, nor was I pursuing the typical career choice that my training would have dictated. And perhaps I got away with being a little lazy in terms of really understanding my theology of work, because there weren't many of us in my demographic, in my age. And those of us that were around were in countries that were very sensitive. We didn't have the media opportunities and social media opportunities that we have now. So I think that you're certainly right. I do know I would articulate to my wife, I am so glad that we are in a restricted country that lets me do what I love to do and what I feel like I've been designed to do, because it's of tactical benefit. But, wouldn't it be great if being integral in my faith and the full expression of my faith, which is to go to join Christ, to seek and save, to do that through my business, to incorporate that into my business, not just because it's what I needed for a visa, not just because there's an argument for it in a restricted country, but because my faith is that integrated into everything I do. Right now, I feel like these were things we would have said when we were younger. Right now, I feel like I can get away with it because it's a means to an end. So in terms of that journey, there's a few aha moments, but it was more aha in terms of, wow, this is how big it could be.
Yeah.
This is how open I could be about it. I had some of those in the early 2000s, but it really did come through a discipleship of just that slow work of Holy Spirit, of the Word, to challenge me to continue to integrate, and then of people in my life that would poke and prod and pull. And at times, Mike, it comes by people saying things that make you shirk a little bit. And you're like, why did the way that was phrased bother me? Why was I offended by that? And I didn't realize, sometimes you don't realize till those comments are made, that, wow, okay, God's brought me on a journey since the last time I had this conversation, or the last time I heard someone phrase it like that. God called me out of business and into ministry. I used to accept that phrase at face value and celebrate the work of the Holy Spirit to save us from business. And now, obviously, that generates more questions than answers for me right now.
Yeah, I remember early in my experience of business as mission back in the early 90s. Well, actually, before that, I left the pastorate. I was a church planner, and I left the pastorate to start a business so I could be among lost people.
Yeah.
Because this was places where people, they don't come to church to hear the gospel. They don't know the Lord, they don't come.
Yeah.
And as soon as I did, my seminary buddies all started calling me up saying, have you lost your faith? Have you left? What's going on? They couldn't imagine. And I wasn't very good at explaining. I knew what God was calling me to do, but I couldn't explain it very well. And it's been a similar journey of him making me a little more articulate in how to express what I felt he was doing. So,
yeah, I think that discipleship piece is important. At times we feel a little sheepish. We feel we need to have this grand story to tell people when they ask, how does God work in your life? Look, I've just learned to really embrace the response that he just keeps asking me to follow, and I keep saying, okay. And where that leads me, it is as much a shaping of my mind as it is a shaping of how I spend my days.
One of my favorite verses is the passage that talks about they are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. I love that verse. And that's how he disciples us, right? We simply follow him, and we learn along the way. So, all right. So you and your wife, you get over to Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
And you began to get a vision for this incubator.
Yeah.
You start with that, but I want to kind of fast forward to that. How did that germinate? And what was the original mission of this thing?
I think there had been years where God had been planting seeds. And maybe you've been there, certainly other listeners have been there, where you're confident that it's God. And yet we get impatient and we're like, okay, if you're giving me this dream, this vision, this seed, this desire, at times even this angst, a problem's been highlighted, and it's always like under that infrared highlight that like a missile target is on, right? Why don't you release me to do something about it? So we had experienced that tension for some time, so that there were some years, and that highlighted thing is people want support. They don't want to go alone. Many years earlier, what you'd hear from early BAMers was, well, if you want to do BAM, get out from whatever community you were part of, sever from whatever sending agency you were with. They don't know how to help you. Go on your own, make your own way. And we had seen more and more people saying, I want help, I want community, I want accountability, I want supports, but I want people who also get me. I believe there must be a tribe to which I belong somewhere. Let me find them. So that angst had been felt for some time, and a sense that we want to participate in that, in defining and creating shape and form to that tribe that would say, let us walk with you. We didn't know how it would look. In fact, we had even registered certain businesses so that they'd be ready to be vehicles for us to do that in case those opportunities came. It didn't happen. Our story took a strange turn, very frustrating, kind of broken. And then we get a call from the past that says, hey, we're seeing our organization, the people who called us say our organization realizes we need to do better to prepare people instead of fixing things after they're running for years and government, tax, market pressures are on them and they're ready to fold. Then we get involved. Why don't we get them started on the right foot, give them the right supports, not ask them to wear someone else's armor, let the entrepreneurs be who they are and find a way to support them in that. We don't know what to call that. We think it's some sort of an incubator. Have you heard of the term? So they pitched that to my wife and I, and we took nearly a year to decide. So this was a long process for us, but it was less about any reluctance about what we were entering, and more it was like we had entered a new chapter. Our kids were starting to graduate high school. My wife had just been given a senior management position in healthcare back in Canada, pension, all of that was just about to be put on the table. So it was probably a bigger sacrifice than the first time. But the problem to solve was, how do we journey with people to preempt, to prevent problems, whether they be paradigm or planning, or the big thing that became central to us was probably the biggest gap, was a place for people to be challenged to pull their business with their spiritual impact goals, to articulate them, not alongside of each other as parallels, but in an integrated way that says, okay, now that I've integrated them, is this viable? Many of us who've done BAM in the past, we would talk to those who cared about the business. We talk about the business. For those who cared about our spiritual impact, our ministry, we'd answer those questions, but rarely did we put them in one bundle. And that would lead to you still meet many people who say of BAM, great idea, but it burns people out because it forces them to choose one or the other. So that was the particular problem.
I call that the dumbbell model, right? You've got your missiological side, your spiritual side, and then you got your business side, but they're barely connected in reality. And that does lead to burnout, because you're really living two lives instead of one integrated.
Two identities, two schedules. You are the one that's connecting the two.
Yeah.
And sooner or later, you're going to snap. So we took about a year to build the program. from there. And our first launch of our first cohort was in January of 2019. And now we are in the middle of cohort 6. And in addition to that, we have launched what we call our distributed model, which we are working with partners in the global South or global majority world, and licensing them in our program and working with them to build, not just having them deliver the program, but to use that program to mobilize to unreached peoples. So even building conduits.
I love the vision as it's unfolding for me. I love that you felt the need, you've experienced the need, and you stepped in. And I respect that you took a year to pray about it versus the typical entrepreneurs. Oh yeah, come on, let's go. So I love that you did that, and then you took another year to build the program. So tell me about Brandon. I'm very curious. I know, you're based overseas from a American perspective, North American perspective, and you didn't do what a lot of people do, is bring them to Vancouver and teach them there, right? I mean, that has a huge gap in it, as you well know. So obviously you're doing it overseas, you're doing it internationally. Do the students come to you? Do they travel and live near you, with you?
Yeah. So our standard program, we call it, because now we have 2 programs. Okay. So our original program that we're still doing was designed with that in mind. It's an 8-month program that we would refer to it as having a respiratory function. It would breathe in and breathe out. So you would do a 1-week intensive with us in our city. And our next phase we're in Southeast Asia, was to have another hub in the Middle East, North Africa region where cohorts that were closer to that would go. I say originally because COVID. So our first 2 cohorts did come here from wherever they were in the world. If they were not yet in amongst the community that they were going to be setting up their business, they needed access. One of our requirements is you need to be able to access it while you are incubating. If you're not living in it, you need to be able to get in and out of it. So if you're in San Francisco and your target is somewhere in North Africa, part of your cost of doing this is saying, I'm making 2 or 3 trips over those 8 months. You have to get to know your customer. You've got to get to understand your market. You have people you need to meet. You've got assumptions to test. You've got licenses online does not work in most emerging markets. They're off, the websites are often populated with all sorts of info. Most of it isn't how things actually work. So our role is to help identify the questions you need to ask, the questions you need answered, what to do with those answers, build out your financial modeling, build out your spiritual impact modeling. Are you going to be working with the local church? Is that an underground church movement? Is there no church? What are you going to do once you hit some critical mass with your business, with your church planting movement? Are you going disciple making movement? Like, we're bringing in all of those pieces, the missiological, the growth strategies for both. Is your growth strategy, is your whole growth strategy based on I'm discipling my employees and then sending them out to start their own business? And what does that kind of turnover mean for my business? So we're dealing with all of those questions. We're not here to answer them, but to help elicit. So so that takes 8 months to get there. Now, when we say 8 months, it's at the end of that 8 months, we suggest you be launching within 3 to 12 months from that point. So there's still work to do. We keep walking with you, but at that point, you're on the ground. You're securing your licenses. You're pulling your team together. You're getting ready for your grand opening, or whatever your model of launch is. So the change, of course, is COVID. We've invested in developing an online platform that works for us, and it's delivered online. There was some discussion of going back to in-person. We lose some things in not being in person, but what we gain is too great. We've been able to drop our costs, which drops the cost for the participant. And perhaps even more importantly, we've made it accessible. So now we have people from developing economies, with much more limited resource that are accessing our program and going amongst unreached people groups in their neighboring countries or communities with our support. And previously they would have not had any kind of access to anything like this. So we're not going back.
We'll be right back after a short break. If your business or ministry would like to sponsor the Business as Mission podcast, simply email info@thirdpathinitiative.com, and we'll set up a conversation about your needs and goals.
It's fascinating to see. We, in our online education platform, that started the summer before COVID. I've been going to where people were. My teams would go to where people were, do the teaching, do the training, and do kind of some of what you're doing, mainly among nationals. And then that summer of 19, the Lord said, I want you to put all this online to make it more accessible. Exactly, same logic. And I had no idea. I mean, I wish I'd known COVID was coming. I'd have gone to the moon or something. The same thing, right? COVID, I know we all hate it, but God did amazing things in the global BAM movement, the global missiological movement during that, forcing us to find new and better ways to achieve the goal. So I love that story as much as we wish it hadn't happened. He obviously has used it to prosper your work. So it's online, but I'm assuming it's a good bit of live interaction. This is not just video you watch and that sort of thing.
We have some videos you watch before we have our first meetings. And then there are some the only videos we do besides that would be guest speakers, which are case studies. But we follow those videos up with live meetings with the people that presented. What we're trying to do is when we're live on a call, we don't want that to be passive time. Live on a call, you're not listening to a lecture. You're not listening to a presentation. Live on a call, you're interacting with the material that you read or watched in video form before joining. So we still have those 4 1-week intensives. They are now held on Zoom, 3 hours a day for 5 days in a row. And then you go and do your field work. And our online platform is kind of this mashup of Teachable or Canva, Canvas with social media. So picture kind of a Teachable meets Facebook. So you can post videos, we can post content, we can create all sorts of discussion groups, topic-based. So all of our alumni stay on this platform and we bring guest speakers through this. We make announcements through it. People send in pictures of their grand openings, of their first shipment that they're making. So all of it, but that's all closed and under, security. So, in terms of.
So your cohorts, they're building relationships with each other.
That's right. As
they journey through this together. Yeah. They're still building the community.
Yeah.
They're not alone. They're finding their tribe. So you're achieving the same thing differently. How many participants in a typical cohort, Rob?
The smallest we've had, our MVP, if you will, our smallest viable is 3. Most I think we've only had one that's only 3, and we've had as many as 8 projects. So some projects, we had one project that had 3 partners participating. Okay. So anywhere from 4 to 10 participants we've had.
No, and that's a good critical mass right there, right? You have enough people that you can be very personal, it's very focused, but also you're building relationship and community. So how does somebody find out about this? Is this, I know you're not advertising it for obvious reasons. Is this serving a particular community, or is it word of mouth the way I found you? I mean, how does this work?
Yeah. I mean, we have a plan and we've been executing the plan. We're a little surprised it's worked. Because we got security concerns for participants and for those of us that facilitate. So we do have a website. The website's open, but you won't see any of my information on it or our other facilitators. So in terms of people who would want to vet us, is this crew serious? It's pretty slim pickings in terms of info that we can share. but we go heavy on networking. We believe in the team that we have who networks with us and for us. So you mentioned Carrie Ann. She's a big part of that for us. And so when you ask me what's your relationship with Carrie Ann, I say she's part of our team.
Yeah.
And that's one of her key functions for us. And there are others. We attend conferences. So I'm starting to get some engagements, opportunities like this. And we don't need that much. I mean, we talk about the size of our cohorts. We don't need that much to be viable. We don't need that much to be overwhelmed, to be honest, because it's a labor intensive model. We have up to 6 facilitators that step in and help with any given cohort. So at times we are more than 1-to-1 between facilitators and participants. We know it's a service-rich offering that we've got. Where our growth, so with some savvy folk, as we have this conversation, they say, okay, how is it sustainable? Where's your growth? Our growth is where we feel the future of this is, and our role is we will keep doing the standard program that I've described. We will keep doing that. It's too valuable for us, the learning we get from doing that, and that will be the ratios that we're talking about. Where our growth is when we're working with those that are coming from the global majorities.
Okay, so tell us about that.
That's a different model now. So that's an organization. So we don't need many of these people to know about us. And to be honest, we've already got a wait list of organizations now that are saying, will you come? We've got, honestly, Mike, we've got more than one organization who's waiting for us now, is saying we've got 30 to 50 people trained cross-culturally with what they believe is enough business to get going, if not already from a business background, and they have their missiology. We just don't have a mechanism to make sure they're properly supported when they go.
Yeah.
And to make sure that they've got their plan in place. We need help devising a plan. So this is our next foreseeable season, is working with these kind of agencies. So we've done our first pilot project, and that was 14 projects. So now we're moving from 4 to 8 per cohort to this one was 14. And as we're working with these 14 businesses, we are training. We have ratios that we try to hit. We are training a group from that context to be coaches on our behalf. So our role changes now. We are not the coaches. We are the deliverers of content, and the coaches are locals who are on our team, but living. So in this case, the person was in Zambia. These are Zambians who are saying, God has called us to unreached peoples across Africa. What will you do to help get us there? And so we have this list, and one of the list, part of that list is, do you have people that are ready to walk alongside all of those if we train them how to do it?
Right.
So in January, we go to Costa Rica to start our Spanish pilot. So that one's got a longer runway because you have to translate our whole program as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then like I said, we've got kind of a backlog of agencies from global majority countries that have received the benefit of years of effective missions work, that those of us in the BAM and B4T movement kind of say, well, why are we doing BAM there? Or why are we sending global workers there? They're saying, God's sending us to UPGs. Will you help us go?
Yeah.
It is incredibly thrilling for us to be part of it, extremely humbling. And we are, now you talk about contextualization. It's a whole new challenge of contextualization for us, because we're trying to make our program something that they own, not that we own.
I love the progression, Rob, when I think about this, right? From vision to execution, you did it, the discipling, and then now it's moving to a stage I would call equipping, where you are equipping others to do this thing. And that's, to me, that's the biblical pattern. And it requires a lot of humility. And I know you're very proud of that. So it's a beautiful model. It's got a very God feel about the progression. of moving to each stage, each phase. I think you called them earlier. So
yeah.
So the next big thing is really going global, but in this model of equipping and I guess licensing others to carry the work on. And so what happens to Rob and company in all of this? I'll bring us in for a landing with that question.
We're growing our team. I'm learning a ton about, I've managed staff before. I not huge, but, pushing, 50. This is another thing, because this is learning not to manage. It's leading and asking people to grow vision and to take what was some seed and I'd say moving into sapling, and to offer that to others to graft in what God's saying to them for their people that they steward and for the visions God has given them. We're trying to hold that very carefully without throwing caution to the wind. I want to hold this in a way that God can take it, but not just throw it up for any wind to grab it and lose it in the transfer. So maybe that's a deeper response than that. What's my schedule look like? But that, in terms of growing, as I'm someone who's used to being a visionary, and then once it's going, I find a manager and I move on. We are not released to move on from this yet.
Wow.
So I'm being forced to grow where, frankly, I don't feel like I have that much to draw on to help guide me in terms of my own experience. And I don't have too many people in my life who've done this kind of thing before either, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be quite a season of stretching and growing for sure. I have to say, for an entrepreneur, you are amazingly methodical, and I don't see that very often in entrepreneurs. They've got a vision, but the methodology to implement that vision is often missing, as you probably see in your cohorts. But you have both. God's given you a vision; He's given you the discipline, and I love your self-awareness that. I start things, I get them running, I get them healthy, and then I hand them over to somebody else. I love that thought process. A lot of people would say it, but you're doing it. And but I love that it's balanced with God isn't releasing me to move on at this time. And there's a real solidness, if that's a word I can use.
Well, thanks. It's affirming. I'd love for you to be honest. My wife and I we just empty nested this year. It would have been great for God to say, okay, the timing's perfect. You brought it to the stage. It's time for someone else and you can join your family, but it's like we're starting over. We're just so excited for this season and hungry to learn. We've got the people we're bringing around us are younger than us, and they're challenging and they're not challenging. They're challenging us. They're pushing and they're asking great questions. God's really brought some incredible people around us. And then we've got some that have had more experience than us as well to advise and to support us. So, that's all great, but we've got to walk it. And I think that's one thing I'd say for anyone who's wanting to move into BAM or B4T. You can take a vision, you can take over something that someone else has started, which interestingly, that's a whole other podcast I'd love for you to do, is to start talking about succession, because that's a real hot topic these days in the BAM space, because we're seeing second and third generation of leaders now coming on, but making it yours without defaulting to what you've always done, and saying, okay, I'm a follower first. It's back to where we started.
Yeah,
I'm a follower first.
Yeah.
And there's incredible satisfaction. For anyone, that's where the real joy is.
Yeah.
Is Jesus as our mentor and travel partner does not run out of material.
That's exactly right. I have a close friend who always says, we're not doing business for God, we're doing business with God.
Absolutely.
He's the first mover, and we're just responding to his leading. And so that's probably a good place to stop now, Rob, but this will not be the last time we talk. Maybe not another podcast, but you and I we'll have more conversation.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated with what you're doing and how God has led you, and want to learn from you, but also want to help you if you can any way along the way. So we will ask people to be praying for you.
Yeah, thank you.
Apologies to the audience, but most of you know anything about BAM know that sometimes we can't give out personal information, locations, names, serial numbers, all of that. It's for obvious reasons. But Rob, God bless you, brother. Thanks for being obedient. Thanks for sharing a little bit of your story with us. I know there's 1,000 more things you could share, but any last word? I always like to give a guest the last word.
On the pragmatic side, maybe we can put up the link to our website.
Okay.
And make that connection available. But I mean, Mike, it's been a real privilege, first of all, to do this. I think one thing that I'm just reflecting on as we're having this conversation is the importance in our journey of telling the story. You know, that's where this conversation started. Every time I tell the story, I'm reminded of what God's done and is doing. I'm in awe. This is not at all what I thought my life would be. And I often forget that because I get caught up in what I've got to do tomorrow or what I've got to queue up for next week or next year. But taking time to pause to tell the story and realize that it's his story you're telling. So as I know we're entering, I don't know when this podcast is going to be made live, but we're entering the Christmas season. Of all the times to be reminded of the importance of telling stories. Maybe that's why this is on my mind, but I just encourage anyone who's out there, tell the story. It's biblical to tell the stories of what he's done. Set up those altars. Acknowledge when things have been overcome. They won't be wasted. And be ready to embrace those moments as adventures that are going to display God's amazing provision, and then be diligent to tell the story.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great set of advice for us. So thank you, Rob. Thanks so much for being with us. I look forward to getting to know you better and follow what God is doing through you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. And to you too. We need more of you.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. We invite you to become part of the story by supporting the BAM podcast at patreon.com/BAM Stories. There's a link in the notes with this episode. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen.